A Pony Express Bible would go exponentially more than this. At least double, definitely into the 5 figures.
For over 22 seasons, the Harrisons captivated millions through their popular show, Pawn Stars. Viewers and fans got a glimpse into their lives as they bargained, appraised, and discovered rare items. However, over time, many familiar faces have been missed, and fans have been wondering what the cast is up to now. So what are they doing today? Let's find out. Corey Harrison. Corey Harrison, also known as Big Hoss, was an interesting personality on Pawn Stars. He started working in the shop at an early age, negotiating deals and finding ways to make the business profitable. Corey was sharp, confident, and often challenged his dad's decisions. But behind the scenes, he carried the pressure of working with his family.
The best part of my job is working with my family every day, and the worst part of my job is working with my family.
Right.
Corey grew up in the shop, learned the business, and was responsible for carrying Rick Harrison's legacy. From the outside, it looked like the perfect choice. But inside, Corey was struggling with his own life. In the shop, it was always about disagreements. However, at one point, he felt like an outsider within his own family. Corey admitted that, "My father had always been a threat and never really understood me." Eventually, Corey demanded 10% ownership of the business, or he'd walk away entirely. That decision proved critical, and for a man like Rick Harrison, this was crossing the line. But out of pity rather than trust, Rick transferred 5% ownership to Corey, placing him at the bottom of the family business. The absence of support, small as it might sound to others, became a lifelong scar, a shadow that followed him into every room, every decision, and every silent night. But that wasn't the whole story. In 2023, Corey was charged with a DUI after significant alcohol consumption and faced up to 6 months in jail.
Metro Police arresting Pawn Stars Corey Harrison early Friday morning, accusing him of driving drunk.
He had spent his entire life trying to protect his reputation, but this was the moment he would always regret. He didn't resist the accusations. Instead, he pleaded guilty, a decision that helped him avoid jail time. Even Corey's personal life wasn't smooth. He had been divorced twice, showcasing that his ongoing struggles significantly affected his relationships. With family drifting away and relationships faltering, the man once starved of affection had become a man starved of peace. Over time, things began to change. In 2025, after 23 seasons of Pawn Stars, Corey made the difficult decision of leaving the show. He later admitted, "I'm 40 now and couldn't pretend to be a 23-year-old anymore." Fans began to notice his absence. Eventually, Corey began focusing more on his health and started his own barbecue restaurant in Mexico. Corey wasn't chasing fame. Instead, he stayed because he cared about the family's legacy. Richard "Old Man" Harrison. Richard Harrison was the steady personality on the show. With his quiet voice and dry humor, he instantly became a fan favorite. He wasn't trying to impress anyone, he just focused on managing the entire process. However, Richard's story began long before the pawn shop ever existed. Richard was born on March 4, 1941 in Virginia. At just 17 years old, Richard joined the military, not because he was passionate about it, but because he was forced to. That's when his life took a different turn. He spent over 2 decades in the Navy, a man whose commanding presence carried him through life with sheer discipline, but remained emotionally distant from his own family. His first daughter, Sherry, died at just 6 years old due to Down syndrome. In those days, Richard admitted he cried quietly after his daughter's passing. Tears not just of grief, but of the emotional weight he had to carry forward. The once strong personality now seemed buried in despair. Richard eventually ended his career as a Navy officer and started a real estate business in San Diego along with his wife, hoping for a better chance of freedom and wealth. At first, the business was thriving, with steady customers and new properties each day. It didn't take long before the money began to pour in. Then, something strange happened. With the change in economy, the interest rates soared and the business collapsed, leaving Richard with over $1 million in debt. For Richard, it wasn't just a temporary defeat, it was a tragic situation he could never recover from. Swallowing his pride, he tore apart everything he thought he knew about real estate and moved to Las Vegas with just $5,000 in his hand and a family to protect. Yet in the middle of uncertainty, a new opportunity presented itself. During his early days in Las Vegas, armed with nothing but a stubborn will and the bruises of failure, Richard Harrison Harrison stepped into the world of second-hand stores, working long hours, trembling not just from stress, but from the deep shadows of failure. Eventually, he decided to start a pawn shop, but the risk came with devastating consequences. The man who had already lost everything was about to walk into a business as merciless as the pain that had already carved scars into his soul. However, over time, Rick began to join hands with his father, opening a gold and silver pawn shop. That became one of the biggest pawn shops in the country. Even after all the success, still, the road was steep and lonely. For every successful business, there were endless nights of fear that another collapse could strip it all away again. But it didn't stop there. In 2016, Richard had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. The news left fans stunned, and Richard began to slowly disappear from the show. However, on June 25, 2018, Richard tragically passed away at 77 years old. His family was deeply affected by his sudden demise. Rick even shared a heartfelt message online, sharing how much he truly meant to him. Chumlee. Austin Russell, also known as Chumlee, brought a unique energy to Pawn Stars. With his funny jokes and unexpected reactions, he made every moment feel special. He started working in the shop at just 21 years old. Chumlee wasn't just a friendly person on the show. He was actually hardworking and deeply committed towards his job. But then something unexpected happened. During an investigation, officers found unregistered guns, substances, and other items in Chumlee's home that led to his arrest.
Assault investigation lands one of the members of Pawn Stars in trouble. Austin Russell, better known as Chumlee, is in jail tonight.
He wasn't the lovable man anymore, but a restless person who broke rules, battled his own addictions, and carried the shame of failing in the public eye. Chumlee was later released after a $62,000 bail and pleaded guilty with 3 years of probation. It wasn't just a damage to his reputation, it could actually be the end of his career. Humiliated yet unbroken, Chumlee returned to the pawn shop. He confessed with raw honesty that even in the middle of filming, surrounded by lights and cameras, he often felt completely alone. However, things got even worse. By 2019, Chumlee was already over 350 pounds. Doctors warned him about the severe health concerns, but it was already too late. After a normal day of work, Chumlee started feeling chest pain. At first, he brushed it off, but eventually, it led to a massive heart attack. While other members continued working on the show, Chumlee was in hospital learning to recover. He later admitted, "There were nights I lay awake, convinced I would lose my life," a confession that showed just how fragile the situation felt. After his recovery, Chumlee opened his own business called Chumlee's Candy, and by 2025, he teamed up with Rick on the podcast called Pawn Stars After Dark. Chumlee's role in the shop made him polarizing, but it also made him unforgettable. Rick Harrison. Rick Harrison was the face of Pawn Stars. With his tough look, sharp voice, and endless knowledge of antiques, Rick guided the shop through every deal. He studied not just business, but power itself, building reputations, striking deals, and uncovering the stories behind every item sold. But his life took a tragic turn early on. Rick was born on March 22, 1965 in North Carolina. At just 7 years old, he battled epilepsy, often suffering from seizures for long days. So he started shifting his focus towards reading books. Rick later dropped out of school and started selling fake Gucci bags for a living. He was always finding ways to make things work, no matter the challenges. His childhood was no fairy tale. It was a crucible, and every silent setback, every shattering failure became the fire that forged his relentless, almost ruthless ambition. Then in 1989, when Rick and his father decided to start a pawn business in Nevada, there was one big problem. Nevada's government wasn't issuing any new pawn licenses. The doors closed even before they had entered. For others, it was a collapse. For Rick, it was an opportunity to find alternate ways to get the job done, and that's when he came across a secret that many overlooked. Rick thought, what if we combined 2 separate licenses? A second-hand dealer's license and a loan license. That decision eventually led to their pawn license. It wasn't just an alternative, it was a gamble with risks unlike any other.
I mean, it was a struggle because when you start a pawn shop, you're loaning out money all the time.
As the seasons went on, Rick had turned the shop into a business empire, but it also left him facing questions about trust, fairness, and the real cost of success. However, more pain was yet to come. Rick's elder son, Adam, tragically died from an overdose at just 39 years old. Rick was left heartbroken by the incident.
It got really, really bad. Apparently it wasn't heroin. He ended up getting some fentanyl, killed him.
Beneath the strong presence was a man trembling in pain. Later, he would confess, "I learned the hard way. Prioritize family first, earn money later," a line that revealed how necessity reshaped his entire outlook. But things became even critical when his own mother filed a lawsuit against Rick regarding ownership over the family estate. While others saw the fracture in relationships, Rick was suffering in silence. Yet behind those sneers, Rick was absorbing the cruelest and most valuable lesson of his life. Family was never about conflicts, it was about connection. Despite everything, Rick still kept moving forward. He's now engaged to Angie Polushkin, a nurse from Las Vegas. Rick's also interested in politics, and some even think he might one day run for office. Rick Harrison built more than just a pawn shop, he built a business empire. From the humiliation of facing a lawsuit against his own mother to the spotlight of reality television, Rick's journey became the ultimate story of reinvention. Rebecca Romney. Rebecca Romney was one of the most beloved members on Pawn Stars. She was the rare book expert, calm, smart, and always prepared. With a deep love for history and literature, she had a way of explaining rare books that made people care for them. Before appearing on Pawn Stars, Rebecca worked at Bauman Rare Books, but eventually co-founded her own company, Type Punch Matrix, a business focused on providing valuable books for each customer. But life doesn't always go as expected. In 2023, Rebecca had been divorced from her husband. Together, they had 2 children. Even through the tough times, she kept working and continued growing. While others chased fame, Rebecca chased meaning, not just in books, but in people. Even today, Rebecca continues to help collectors and museums find books that matter, not just for money, but for the true value each book provides. Rebecca reminded viewers that books aren't valuable because they are rare, but because each book carries a story that's left unheard. So who's your favorite Pawn Stars member? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you liked the video, don't forget to like and subscribe and click the next video on screen now for another interesting story.